3 years as the tax chairman. By far this year, you are a much better chairman than you've been in previous years. You're definitely growing into your job. I mean, you've done a good job of hearing members' bills. We heard a lot of bills this year, a lot of bills on both sides of the aisle. Some of them are good ideas. Members, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, some of them are clunkers, and they didn't make their way in. But a little trip down memory lane, and I don't mean to take too long, but I can't help it. In 2013, after managing more than a decade of deficits, this legislature and the tax committee under the leadership of Senator Skoye and Representative Lenczewski in the House, down in room 15, put together an omnibus tax bill that ultimately ended up in law, and it fixed the ongoing structural deficits that the state had. And in 2013, for the first time in more than a decade, we built a budget that didn't have gimmicks and accounting shifts in it, honest budget for the state that invested in our future. And what that set up was a succession of a number of years where things were pretty easy around here. And in 2015, in that next budget, we had money, and we had a Republican House, and we had a Democratic Senate, and Representative Dowd and I, at the time, were able in 2015 to put 2% and 2% on the K-12 formula and invest significant new money in higher education in our state, ensuring that the quality of life in Minnesota and our educated workforce and our businesses continue to grow and thrive by those investments in our educational infrastructure. And in 2017, we were still feeling the effects of what happened and the tough votes that people took in 2013, and we had money. And we did it again. We invested a significant amount of money in 2017 with a Republican House, a Republican Senate, and we invested 2% and 2% on the K-12 formula. Again in 2017 with a Republican legislature, because of the work that was done in 2013, when the legislature had the courage to right the ship and make sure that Minnesota was no longer going to manage structural deficits and put budgets together with accounting gimmicks and shifts. So many people have enjoyed the fruits of the work that the legislature did, that Senator Skoye and Representative Lenczewski did back in 2013, but it's coming to an end. And we passed a tax bill in 2014 that I wasn't enamored with. Governor Dayton actually had a press conference after about 3 weeks. The Senate was sitting on the House bill that came over because we thought, having just fixed the problem, we shouldn't rush right away in the next year to cut taxes, but held a press conference, kicked me around, and we ended up passing a pretty significant tax reduction bill in 2014. We passed another one in 2015. And 2016, the governor vetoed the tax bill. 2017, we passed a huge tax bill. I would argue that's leading to the problems we see or certainly a huge contributing factor to the problems we see in the February budget forecast. 2018, thank God, Governor Dayton decided to veto not only the supplemental budget bill, but the tax bill, because he could see that we had come to the end of the road. And the hard work that was done in 2013 and all the tough votes people took to right Minnesota's ship again had all been spent away. Had Governor Dayton signed those bills, we'd be sitting here with significant deficits in the hundreds of millions of dollars. That's what we'd be facing this session. But because he vetoed them, we have the benefit of coming in here with $1 billion one-time surplus. But the opportunity missed this year is the recognition of the fact that in the February budget forecast, even if we take that $1 billion of one-time money, if we spend any of it, even a nickel of it, in the next biennium, we've got a deficit. That's the reality, of about $11 million according to the February budget forecast. You can't continue to spend in tax bills and spending bills and expect that the money's just going to keep flowing in. Eventually, you spend more than you take in. And it's interesting, having been here a while, to see how cyclical this all is. And maybe it's because we have so much turnover and there aren't enough institutional memories. And Senator Chamberlain, to the fact about how long Senator Rest is here, I kind of chuckled a little bit when you compared her tenure to Jack Paulson's when I got here. And many of you think I've been here a long time. When I got here to the other body, Senator Rest was already the tax chair in the other body. So she has been here a little while, but I don't think as long as Jack Paulson. But my concern, Senator Chamberlain, is over the fact that we are not at all looking down the road as what this body is going to face in 2021. We're absolutely ignoring it. We all know we're facing a deficit. I mean, the numbers are what they are. It's just math. There's a deficit on the horizon, and we're doing nothing to deal with it. And the provision that I really don't understand that's not included is the repatriation of foreign income and the deferred foreign income that would raise hundreds of millions of dollars that could fix our problem for the next biennium, for the next legislature. Hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. The federal government's going to collect the taxes on it. The federal government's going to collect the taxes on all that foreign income coming in here. But Minnesota is not. The big money's at the federal level. And why we don't take this conformity as an opportunity to make sure that there's revenue available for the next legislature to invest in the things that they think are important is just a myth to me. And the fact that we wouldn't capture any of that foreign operating income, none of it, not a penny of it, for a safe schools revenue? We all agree we all want our schools to be safer places for our kids. And we had an amendment where we used some of the foreign income, foreign-derived income, and spent about $50 million a year on safe schools for our school districts. We didn't get one Republican vote, not a one. I'm actually pretty shocked at that. You know, we don't want to do anything on gun safety. Okay, I get that. I got a gun safe at home too. But can't we at least make sure our buildings are secure? We can't agree to tax foreign income that the federal government is taxing? We can't tax it in Minnesota to provide some money to make sure our schools are safer? I just don't understand the priority. You know, Senator Chamberlain, if we're not going to do anything to fix the problem that's on the horizon, I would argue we should do nothing. We should do nothing. Don't even pass a tax bill. Because although people will argue there's a lot of good provisions in this bill, and I don't disagree about that, there's some real clinkers too. I mean, the chained CPI that the federal government is now recognizing that Senator Chamberlain is picking up that's changing from the traditional consumer price index that we use in our tax code to something called a chained CPI, a lower number. Tell you what that means. It means that taxes are going to go up in Minnesota by about $44 million in this biennium, $97 million in the next biennium, just because we're changing the inflation. What it means is things like people's property tax refunds are going to go down because we're changing the inflation. People's income taxes are going to go up because we're not going to index the brackets for inflation like we under current law do. So people's income taxes go up, their property tax refunds go down. The cap on the SALT deductions, $15,000. And Senator Chamberlain, I appreciate that you're going higher than Congress did at $10,000. We're at least going to $15,000 in Minnesota. Members, $108 million that raises in revenue in this biennium. $108 million tax increase because we're putting a limit on the SALT deduction just like the federal government did. And it gets worse. Under current law, we allow you to take your itemized miscellaneous deductions if they're more than 2% of your income. And this bill changes it to 5%. So your miscellaneous deductions won't get counted until you're at 5% of your income rather than the 2% we currently have. So, you know, a year ago, many of us, myself included, were thinking, boy, we got to do something with conformity. We're going to make tax filing so complicated that we probably should pass something. Well, by midsummer, Department of Revenue had found a court case from 1971. It's the Wayne M. Wallace case versus the state of Minnesota. If you want to Google, it'll come up. And Mr. Wallace, in 1966, had taken a bunch of medical expenses that were not allowed under the federal law, but he took them in his state return. And the state disallowed them because the federal government didn't allow them. And he went to court, and it took a few years before it worked its way through the court, and the court finally decided that the federal government has no authority under the Constitution to tell states what their tax code is. And he prevailed. So that is the provision. The Wallace provision from 1971 is the one that the Department of Revenue hung their hat on. And that's why Minnesotans in 2018, when they filed, were able to totally ignore the federal tax changes when they filed their 2018 income tax returns. So there was no difference in Minnesota. You could take the standard deduction, or you could itemize how you did before. We basically ignored the federal law as it relied on, related to Minnesota income taxes. I would argue with many of the changes in this bill, we'd be better with nothing. We wouldn't have the SALT cap. We wouldn't have the change, many of the federal changes that are impacting. We wouldn't have the chained inflation that's going to make income taxes go up and property tax refunds go down going forward. I think we're actually probably better off with nothing than doing this. If we're going to do this, because this federal bill was a real clunker, right? I mean, I described it as a pig that the president was coming here to try to put a little lipstick on or put a smile on. It wasn't a very good deal for us. If it was a good deal for us, it wouldn't raise $850 million if we just conformed with what the federal government did. Not a very good deal. And Senator Chamberlain's trying to mitigate that, but he's not picking up enough of the provisions that address the budget challenges that the state has going forward. You know, we tried to make some improvements to it, to add the working family credit, to add some local government aid and county program aid, to add some buffer credit language and some child care credit language to try and make it a little better, but the majority rejected all of those, so we are where we are. And there's things in here to like, but there's things in here that aren't so good either. There's a lot of Minnesotans that are going to lose under this bill, and it's very, very, very hard to do something like federal tax conformity and hold people harmless. Senator Chamberlain, I absolutely acknowledge that. But we might just be better off, members, if we do nothing. And we rely on the Wallace decision that we relied on last year. And Minnesota continues to go down the road in our tax system and just ignore what the federal government did. But I don't think this is the solution. Senator Chamberlain, I look forward to the work of the conference committee and see if between the House and the governor we can improve this some. There's an opportunity here to make sure that the next legislature isn't facing a deficit. Because right now I believe that's where we're putting ourselves into. And I just don't feel, having been here, I think we have a higher responsibility than to hand off to the next legislature a deficit. The next House and Senate both up. They're all going to come in here. A lot of them are going to be new, going to be excited about being here, only to find out, look what the previous legislature did. They left me a deficit. They left me no money. No money to invest in things that I think are important when I ran for office. I just think we have a higher responsibility than that. And we're just not, maybe we don't have the courage to do that, right? Because it's hard. The hardest votes in this building are down in room 15 when the tax committee's got to figure out how we raise the revenue to invest in the things we all agree are important. And I thought it was kind of interesting that we had chairs of finance committees. Chairs of finance committees get up earlier tonight and say how they like this bill. Because I'll bet at the same time, they've been lobbying Senator Gazelka for a higher target. And they're going to lobby for a higher target when the conference committee targets come out. Give me a little more money. There's a little bit more I want to do in higher ed. There's a little bit more I want to do in K-12. Well, you know, you can't have it both ways. You can't cut taxes and give all the revenue away and then as a spending chair say, oh, by the way, I need revenue. Need revenue for my conference committee. It's just math, people. Just math. Anyway, it's a pretty easy green vote. Some of us will be back here 2 years from now if you prevail and this turns out to be the final bill. Some of us will be back here 2 years from now trying to figure out how we right the ship again. Fortunately, one of the other things we did in 2014 was make sure the state had a solid budget reserve, and it's significant. Senator Cohen and I had much to do with making sure that got in law, so we're going to have a little safety valve if things really go badly and GDP growth falls off. But there was an opportunity here with federal conformity to make sure that we didn't have a deficit in the next biennium, and I would describe this bill as a swing and a miss. So, members, I'd urge a no vote.